to help create. Prepare for yourself for healing. Prepare for yourself for an experience. I would also ask you to prepare for yourself a change in heart or a change energetically for you. So it is my honor to introduce.
So much. When Hope started reading from that book, I didn't realize that it was my book that she was reading. And she was reading, I was thinking, man, that sounds like something I've heard.
It's so lovely.
Well, it is really such a pleasure to be here with you folks. It really is. I lived in Minneapolis from 1986 to 1990. And then I moved to Los Angeles, where I lived from 1990 until 2000. And while I was living in Los Angeles, you see, I went there as a rock musician. I used to play in an AC/DC tribute band. I did the part of Angus Young. Now, I didn't wear these clothes, but I played hard rock music. And when I moved to Los Angeles, like many rock musicians, I ran out of money pretty soon. And I ended up down to my last $100. I was 30 years old. My parents wouldn't bail me out anymore. Can you believe it? And I started playing the flutes at Venice Beach with a woman who played the harp. And we made tapes called Celestial Winds, which was me playing the flute and her playing the harp. And these are called recorders. Everybody learns this in the 3rd grade. I'm sure you've seen that, you know. I am the pride and joy of my 3rd grade teacher because I'm the only guy who's And so these were Renaissance instruments and Baroque instruments. And does anybody know why these instruments were called chamber music? It's worth 10 points at the end of the game. We have a winner because people would gather in the chambers of the churches, which was the meeting places. And these churches had reverb in it, and it made the flute sound more heavenly. Okay, so each one of these, so that's the soprano, this is an alto, this is a tenor. And now, when I play 2 of these at one time, the 2 notes create what's called a triharmonic tone. The 2 notes create a 3rd note. And that 3rd note is a frequency. So I'm going to show you a little bit about it. You can hear that's 1 note. That's 1 note. But when I'm playing together, you can hear something that sounds like a zzz. Can you hear that? Okay, so that is a frequency. Everything in heaven is based on frequency and vibration. And I found out after playing 2 flutes at one time for about 30 years, that vibration that the 2 flutes create is the same vibration that people experience during near-death experiences. And I'm sure you've all heard people talk about having an experience of going through the tunnel. There's music in the tunnel. And once people get to that light at the end, then they're in heaven. And so I do music at the conferences for people who have survived near-death experiences. And would you like to take a guess how many people in the United States over the last 40 years have had a near-death experience that was documented by their nurse or doctor in the hospital? Well, guesses from the audience, you young man. 37,000. Okay, all right. Anybody else want to take a wild guess? All right, well, you were close. It's 20 million people.
Wow.
20 million people who woke up from a car accident, a coma, an operation. When they woke up in the hospital, the first person they shared their experience with was their nurse or their doctor. So there's 20 million medical records, which are legal records, with people sharing their experience in the heavenly dimension. And that means that people of every single religion are describing heaven in the same words. You see, we're taught in this physical world, like if there's a church on this corner, a temple on this corner, and a synagogue on that corner, we're taught that those are competing things for our attention, or actually for our salvation, if you want to call it that, right? But that's from our physical perspective, looking up at the heavenly dimension. But from the heavenly dimension looking down, Moses and Jesus and Krishna and Buddha and Mother Mary and the saints of every religion are one team. Now, I have to tell you, the beginning of every New Age book or every spiritual book ever written starts with the writer saying, I never thought I'd be involved in anything like this, right? Because unless you were born with psychic abilities, you wouldn't know that any of this stuff is possible, you know? And when I was younger, it was a real insult to say to somebody, have you lost your mind? But you guys are here to try to get beyond your mind. So good luck losing your mind today. Because that's what we want to get to. You know, Einstein said, our imagination is the greatest part of ourselves. Our imagination is the doorway to our spiritual experiences. Because if we use our imagination in the beginning of our meditation, after a little while, our mind relaxes and there's space in between our thoughts. And then things start to appear in our inner vision, or we start to hear inner sounds, or we get to experience things from this other dimension. Okay, now, ordinarily you wouldn't ask people, how many of you have had a near-death experience? That wouldn't be something like on your first date with somebody, you probably wouldn't talk about that, you know what I mean? But have any of you had a near-death experience that you've had? Is anybody? Okay, great. So the folks of you who haven't had a near-death experience, if you would like to have a glimpse into what the heavenly dimensions look like and can feel like, you can ask her, because she's been there and then she came back to finish off her life because it wasn't her time to go over there. Okay. Now, people who've had near-death experiences, they always come out of that experience with psychic abilities that they didn't have before. Okay. So I'm going to give you a little couple-minute flute meditation, just for a couple of minutes, so then we can get into the topic for today. Okay, so if you want, close your eyes. So when I started to do meditation events in 2014, I had sold 1 million CDs playing music at art festivals and at spa conventions. And I thought I was just a good flute player. And what happened was in 2010, I started having experiences with somebody who wasn't alive anymore. And when he was alive, I wasn't interested in him. And I had just left Minneapolis. It was 2010, and I moved to the East Coast. And one after another, amazing, amazing things happened, and it was all connected to a famous guitar player, a guitar player that I was not interested in because I was a Led Zeppelin fan. I knew every Led Zeppelin song, every AC/DC song. That was hard rock music that I loved. So when George Harrison from the Beatles started appearing to me, I couldn't understand why he was interested in me because I wasn't interested in him. I didn't know any Beatles songs. And one thing after another started to happen. And about a year after my experience started, for no reason, I made this painting. I wasn't a painter. I couldn't draw, but I was dating a woman who was a painter, and she had this big canvas that was 4 feet by 3 feet. And when I saw this thing the first time under a spare bed in the spare bedroom, I just felt something was going to happen with this. So after about 6 months, I had been watching her paint, and I thought, you know, I'm going to make a painting. And for no reason, I made this painting. Well, I put it up on the wall. I felt this good energy from it. A couple of weeks later, one of my friends gave me a book on George Harrison's life. And in that book is a picture of George's favorite jacket that he wore at the after party for the concert for Bangladesh. Okay, so I'm going to pass this around so you guys can chew on this for a little bit. Okay. So that was something that I couldn't talk myself out of. Because during that year, because I didn't believe in channeling, because I grew up in Brooklyn, and we had different words for channeling. Yeah. And so after this happened, it was about a year after my experiences started. And during that year, George had appeared in my meditation once, and he had appeared in, and you're probably wondering, what in the world could this have to do with Jesus and Mary Magdalene? Okay, well, we're going to find out. So during that year, George had appeared to me in my meditations once and in my dreams twice. And he was always dressed in some kind of biblical looking stuff. And he never smiled at me. Here, this guy is popping into my life in all these different ways. And whenever he appears to me, he's looking at me with the most serious face, not the kind of face you would make to somebody that you're trying to become friends with. And I'm thinking, what could be so serious? If you're trying to connect with me, what could be so serious that you would make this serious face to me? And so after I made the painting, George appeared to me in a dream, all big smiles for the first time. And what he said to me was really bizarre. He said, I'd like to play tennis with soft grass behind me. And you see that funny, like, oh, yeah, and just went like, what? And so I said, maybe I didn't hear you right, but what? What did you say? And he said, I'd like to play tennis with soft grass behind me. He disappeared in front of me, burst out laughing. I woke up, it was 3 o'clock in the morning. I woke up my girlfriend. I said, what do you think it means? And she said, I have no idea, but I need to wake up for work in 2 hours. So let me go back to sleep. That sounds pretty normal, right? Well, at the end of the month, Rolling Stone magazine put out the George Harrison special issue because it had been 10 years since George died. And in that issue was this picture of George playing tennis with the grass behind. Now, there's only 2 words in bold on that page. Can you tell me the 2 words in bold on the bottom?
Forever young.
Forever Young, my nickname, David Forever Young. So if he had died 10 years earlier, how did he make that happen? So after 3 years of these experiences with George, I had enough stories for this book. I didn't believe in channeling, but my book is called Channeling Harrison. Because I didn't channel George. I didn't get messages from George to give to people because I didn't know how to channel. I just kept track of all the stories that became part of the book. And once the book came out, I started to do book promotional events, in groups like this, at bookstores, at metaphysical bookstores. And I would talk for about 45 minutes and tell lots of details of all these things. They convinced me that this was real because I was a proud skeptic. I thought if I showed people I was skeptical, that's a way of showing people that I'm intelligent. Maybe a couple of you guys can relate to that, right? Because we're taught to be skeptical. We're taught not to believe things, certain things in life. But what happens when you've had so many experiences in your life that keep adding up, that are all connecting to one person or one thing? At a certain point, it's not intelligent to take those things seriously. Like, you know that joke about the guy he's on the top of his roof and there's a big flood, and the guy comes by in a canoe and he says, "Man, the waters are rising. You want to come in? I can save you." And the guy says, "No, God's going to save you." Well, the next day, the guy comes by in a rowboat. He says, "Man, the waters are rising. I can save you. Come in the boat." He said, "No, God's going to save you." Well, the next day, the waters rise up over the house. This guy drowns. He ends up in heaven. He says to God, "God, why didn't you save me?" And God said, "I sent you the guy in the canoe. I sent you the guy in the rowboat." So when are we going to take those signs of life? And when are we going to take them seriously? Because there's a reason why these magical things happen in our lives. There really is. And sometimes I tell people we can only see as far as our fingers, right? But God can see so far into our future and into our lives. And just to clarify something, whenever you're talking to people about God, there is a really, really easy way to get everybody to agree with you. All you have to do is call God the Creator. Nobody's going to argue with you when you say God's the Creator. Every religion has different words for God the Creator, and has different words for the Holy Spirit, the Great Spirit, eternal energy, all of these words in different languages. In Hinduism, they call it the body. In Buddhism, they call it the sound current. Every religion has a creator. Every religion has a God spirit that manifests to us. And the main thing that separated all of these religions were the oceans. Because if you grew up in India and you grew up studying Krishna, who lived 7,000 years ago, who was also a pretty good flute player. I've heard. Seriously. Glad he's not here because this way I'd have competition. So if you grew up in India, and if your family was Hindu, you were most likely going to be Hindu, and you spoke that language, so you had words in your language that you understood. But somebody else in China who grew up studying Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching, or Buddhism, that's who you would associate with as the way to get to God. And the words that they used were like 6 of one and half a dozen of another. Because they were talking about the same thing, but because they were talking about different languages. That was the problem. Okay? So one of the things that I've learned, I have to tell you, I have to tell you where I learned all this stuff. I learned this stuff by coming to my own events. Because I didn't believe this stuff before I started doing these events. I started doing the David Young Channeling George Harrison events in 2014. And after I talked for a little while, I'd play a little meditation for 20 or 25 minutes. And then after the meditation was over, I would ask the people, okay, who would like to share? And the woman in the front row on the right side raised her hand. She said, my grandmother appeared to me. And she looked so much younger than I remember her. Her eyes were sparkling. She took me all around heaven. she introduced me to a lot of my loved ones that I remember when I was a little kid, and some of them that I had never met. And they had a big table with food. They were in a big party. Man, it was great. Thank you so much, David. I couldn't roll my eyes at that woman because I'm in front of the room. Okay? I'm supposed to know about this stuff. That's the first time I ever heard anybody share anything like that. So you can imagine how shocking that was for me. So as polite as I could, I said, well, thank you very much for sharing. Would anybody else like to share? And a woman on the left side said, my mom appeared to me. Oh my God, she was so happy to see me. She took me all around heaven. We connected with my aunts and my uncles and all these people I remember when I was a kid. Wow. So now I have two people in a row. I've heard my first two experiences right there. So at that first event, 5 people shared that experience. And I really didn't know what to think about this. Every event I've ever done, and this is my 528th event, every event that I've done, at least half of the audience has shared an experience like that, or an experience with one of the Ascended Masters. And I'll tell you how that started. First of all, you gotta know, I grew up in a Jewish family in Brooklyn. My great-grandfather was a rabbi in Europe. My mom kept kosher, which is, one set of silverware and plates for milk and one set of silverware for meat, because you're supposed to keep that separate in Judaism. I went into a church one time in my life when I was in high school because I was dating a girl who was Catholic. And I went in the church for 5 minutes. I had to leave after 5 minutes because I was too afraid to stay in there. Okay, so after doing about 100 events over that year, where I would tell all these stories about George Harrison and how I got convinced that this was real. One of my friends asked me to do a meditation event without telling the George Harrison stories, and just to play 2 half-hour meditations and let people share their experiences after the first one, then we'd take a break, and then we would do a second meditation. And that's when something weird happened. People sharing that their mom and their grandmother and their best friend from childhood appeared to them, that wasn't weird to me anymore. Because I heard that 4 nights a week by 5 or 10 or 15 people every night. So after living through that, I expected people to share this because it was a consistent thing. It was almost like a science experiment or a spiritual science experiment that I was doing, where I was sharing the same stories, then playing basically the same kind of music. And then when people had a chance to share, they were all sharing the same experiences. But when I did this event without telling the whole story about how this channeling Harrison thing began, the weird thing that happened was that 3 people all saw Jesus standing off to the right of me, in there was a corner over there. Now, can you imagine what that would feel like for me? Where do you put that in your brain? How do you process that, right? So, of course, I couldn't roll my eyes at the person because I'm in front of the group, right? And so I said, well, I've done this event channeling George Harrison many, many times, and a lot of times people saw George Harrison standing in spirit next to me on the right side. I said, how do you know that it wasn't George Harrison? Because George had long dark hair and he had a beard. I mean, you could think that they would look similar from what we've heard about what Jesus looks like. How do you know it wasn't George Harrison? And the guy said, well, it's funny you said that, because that was my first thought. Is that George Harrison? Mm-hmm. And at that moment, Jesus made a cross appear behind him. He started flying over the heads of everybody in the room with blood flying everywhere. Can you imagine hearing that? And I really didn't know what to say when I heard that, because that sounded like the craziest thing I'd ever heard in my whole life. And so as polite as I could, I said, well, thank you very much for sharing. Does anybody else want to share anything? And a lady raises her hand and she said, I saw Jesus standing in the same spot over to the right of where you're sitting. And he made a cross appear behind him, it was flying over everybody's head, there was blood flying everywhere. And I'm thinking, man, is there something up with the water around here? You know, I never heard anybody share anything like this. I didn't know what to think of it. But at the end of the event, my friend's wife came over to me. I knew this woman. She was a very grounded, educated, smart person that was not a woohoo granola kind of person at all. Okay. And she came over to me while I was packing up and she said, I saw him standing in the same spot as the other two, but I don't want to say anything in front of everybody. Wow. I trusted this person. I knew this person. So during this time, a famous channeler contacted me from Canada, and his name is Bob Murray. When he was alive, that's his name was Bob Murray. And Bob Murray had an online magazine where every month he interviewed 4 people in heaven. So over 30 years, he's interviewed Albert Einstein 25 times, and Mark Twain 20 times. Every person of note of history that you can think of, he had interviewed numerous times. And he had interviewed John Lennon 20 times, and George Harrison 10 times. And so he found out, all the way up in Canada, that I have this book coming out called Channeling Harrison. And because he had channeled George 10 times since George died in 2001, he sent me an email. And he sent me an email answering 5 questions that I've been asking all of my friends. Because I couldn't understand why I was involved in this. I wasn't a Beatles fan, but it really wasn't about the Beatles. So I called up Bob Murray and I said, hey Bob, you know, I talked to Bob every day for 2 years until he died, for an hour to an hour and a half, and he never charged me anything because I was supposed to know this stuff. And I was supposed to understand, bit by bit, what was happening at my events. So at these events, I would always see in the back of the hall, above the heads of the people, I would always see these, I would call them light beings, because they were in the shape of humans, like us, but they were made of this white light, right? And there would be some bigger ones, but most of them were all about the same height. So I called up Bob Murray and I said, Bob, what are these light beings in the back of the room that I'm seeing, you know, when I'm playing the flute in the meditation? Well, he says, well, George said through Bob Murray, he said, well, when we set up these events, we is the key word in that sentence, because I thought I was setting up these events. But when we set up these events, from our heavenly perspective, we can see the loved ones of the people in the audience. And so we keep them in the back because we know you're afraid of ghosts. Because I was really afraid of ghosts my whole life. Because when I was a kid, I used to think that there was a bearded man sitting at the bottom of my bed. And like, how fast can you put the covers over your head? So I was afraid of ghosts. So when 3 people saw Jesus standing off to the side of me, I called up Bob and I said, this will be my prop. I said, hey Bob, 3 people at the event last night saw Jesus standing off to the right, and 2 ladies in the room saw Mary Magdalene and Mother Mary. I said, can you channel Jesus? Because why did he come tonight? I've been doing this event all year. Why is this the first time he came? And Bob said, well, I can't guarantee that I can connect with Jesus, but I can try. So I said, okay, I'll hold. Really, this is pretty human, right? Like, and so I'm holding for what felt like a very long time. It was like 2 minutes, but it really felt like a long time. So finally, after 2 minutes of being on hold, Bob says, okay, I've connected with Jesus, what do you want to ask him? What am I gonna ask him? What am I gonna talk about? Somebody in history that when I was a kid, we weren't allowed to say his name in our house. Just like if you grew up in a Christian home, you probably didn't talk about Buddha and Krishna too much. That wouldn't have been appropriate. So my mind went blank, I couldn't think of anything to say. And all I could think of is, this is the weirdest thing. Like, what Jewish kid ever thinks he's gonna have a conversation with Jesus, right? So I said, man, I really feel a little uncomfortable with this, and it feels really strange having a conversation with you because I grew up in a Jewish family. And when Bob was channeling Jesus or George or John or whoever, he would always take some of the qualities of their voice and the way that they spoke. So Jesus speaks in a deep voice, and he speaks very slow. And I think part of the reason why he speaks very slow is because it really creates a unique, not necessarily a tension, but a unique suspense in the conversation. And so he said, well, I can understand that. I grew up in a Jewish family also. Well, that made me laugh. And that made me think that he was trying to make me comfortable, because when you try to make somebody laugh, it makes them feel at ease. And I said, well, I don't know what to believe about what I've heard about you, because I grew up in a Jewish family, but I also don't know what not to believe about what I've heard about you, because there's a lot of people who think you're really great. So I said, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Like, what do you like? Or what don't you like? Because if you're going to start a conversation with somebody from another time in history, you got to have a starting point. So the first thing he said to me was, I don't like, I'll use the slow, deep voice, because it's more fun, okay? I don't like pedestals, because when people put others up on high pedestals, the only thing they get is a stiff neck from looking up. That made me laugh. Okay, he's made me laugh. The first two things he said to me, I'm already laughing, so that's a good thing. What else? He said, I don't like rituals. When people do rituals, they think they're getting closer to God, but because a ritual is done so many times over and over, it becomes mechanical. It's not coming from our heart. He said the only way we really connect with God is through opening our heart to love. And at first I was thinking he was talking about the Catholic Church, but then I realized every religion has rituals that people do over and over again. And then the third thing he said to me was a real shock, because with everything that we've heard about him from the past, this was the last thing that I thought he was going to say. And he said, I did not create Christianity. Because I had had so many conversations with Bob Murray, where he channeled George and John, I could feel George and John's presence in this whole conversation when Bob was channeling Jesus. And I thought to myself, whoever thought you'd have a conversation and that Jesus and John Lennon and George Harrison would be part of the conversation? Like, who'd have thought that, you know? And I said, you know, I'm wondering, do you and George and John, do you guys get together once in a while? Like, is this normal? Like, I would have never made a connection between you and the Beatles. And Jesus said, well, there have been times that I have sought George and John's help. Right after that, Bob Murray says, Bob, Dave, I gotta go right now. See ya. Click. What? What? Why would Jesus need George and John's help? Where, to get a new guitar, he didn't know how to tune it or something like this? What could possibly, how could those things connect? So the next day, I cannot get this out of my head. Why would Jesus need George and John's help? So at the end of the day, I called Bob Murray. I said, Bob, I gotta ask Jesus something. Can you see if you can get a hold of him again? Because I gotta ask him something. I can't get this thing out of my mind. So he says, well, I'll try to connect with Jesus, but I can't guarantee anything. So I said, I'll hold. And so I only have to wait about a minute this time. Maybe he knew maybe he was prepared. And so I said, I don't understand. Why would you ever need George and John's help? And he said, well, there are certain people I'm supposed to be working with and doing projects with. And for one reason or another, they're not open to me. And so when I can't get through to them, sometimes because George and John were so famous in the Beatles and so loved in the Beatles, and then after the Beatles, in their solo careers, they were so loved. So there are people that I go to John and George to help me connect with somebody that I'm supposed to be working with and doing stuff with. Man, that really made a lot of sense and put my mind at ease. And it took me 5 years to realize that he was talking about me. There's nothing in the world that could have ever convinced me that I would be sitting in front of anybody talking about this stuff. It was unimaginable for me. But once Jesus and Mary Magdalene and Mother Mary started showing up to people at my events, they showed up at every event I did. And they brought their friends. They're buddies with Buddha and Moses and Krishna and Isis, the Egyptian goddess, and Kuan Yin. They're all one team. And so I got to find out what they all believe in up there, because they consistently appeared to people at my events, and I got to hear firsthand from somebody within 10 minutes of them having an experience with one of the Ascended Masters, what they were taught, what the energy was like, what they looked like. I got to find out all this stuff by coming to my events, because honest to goodness, if I hadn't heard this with my own ears and seen this with my own eyes, I would have never, ever believed this. And over the years of 1,500 people sharing their experience with Jesus, Mary Magdalene, and Mother Mary, and with all of the information that I was given from people in the audience, because when I started doing these events, many of the people who came to my events were professional psychics, channelers, people who did Reiki healing, energy healing, people who were connected spiritually. And these people would get messages. So just imagine it's a Thursday night, and a woman on the left side raises her hand after the meditation and says, Jesus appeared to me and he gave me a message to give to you. So everybody perks up in the audience. Oh, gee, what could this be? And Jesus is telling me to tell you that there's big news coming out of the Vatican in Rome. And I'm like, are you sure that's for me? I never cared what came out of the Vatican in Rome. I mean, where's that coming from? And then the next night, Friday night, an hour and a half away in a different city with a completely different audience, 2 women raise their hand one at a time and say, Jesus gave me a message for you, and he wants to tell you that there's big news coming out of the Vatican in Rome. Like, it starts to become comical, because this was night after night. He would give me the same message from different people who never met each other. How can I convince myself out of that? There's no way to disprove that. 2 weeks later, the new Pope issues a statement that pisses off everybody at the Vatican. The new Pope said there is no hell up there. The only hell there is down here on earth. This became a normal part of my life. And honest to goodness, this can really become a normal part of your life, because you don't need anybody to interpret anything about anything spiritual for you, because you can have your own experience directly with whoever you look to. They are one team, and they like to be called the heavenly team. So In 2019, I put out this book. This book is the only book ever made that has 90 minutes of music that you access through QR codes every couple of pages. So it's like if this was a movie, you get the soundtrack while you read the book. My publisher sold over 1 billion books. Remember those books, Computers for Dummies and This for Dummies? Those were all his books. He published books by every famous New Age writer who ever lived. And when he would give 3 books out, he published thousands of books. When he would give his three most favorite books, this was one of his 3 books. And when this book came out, I did not know what I'm going to share with you guys today that I call the diagram of their family tree. Okay? I got this download 4 months ago. And it's a way that really explains things in a way that it takes very little to put these pieces together. Are you able, do I need to pull this over here? Okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Now, in the world of screenwriting, there are mysteries. Do I need to move this over a little bit?
Perfect.
Oh, it's perfect, okay. Now, there's different reasons. What's that?
I don't think your mic is on.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you. There's 2 reasons why people write mysteries. One is because they want to make it a real suspenseful thing, so when you get to the end of the story, it's a big payoff because you figure out the mystery. And there are other mysteries that have been designed because they don't want you to figure it out. So, if you saw the last 3 minutes of a movie, you'd have no idea how any of these characters are connected. You wouldn't know their relationships. They're just 3 random people, and you could never figure out what the whole movie is about until, if you don't watch the whole movie, so you're basically left with a mystery. So all we are left with in the Bible, after it was rewritten in 381, does anybody know what the Council of Nicaea was? Okay. In the year 381, the Council of Nicaea was arranged by Emperor Constantine. And the reason why he called this council, and Nicaea is a place in Turkey, like a beachside town, beautiful place, was because after 381 years of Christianity, there were fights and riots breaking out all over the Roman Empire because half of the people believed that Jesus was born God, and the other half of the people believed he was born a man who became spiritual and became godlike, so God adopted him. And people were killing each other over this. Okay? So Emperor Constantine is seeing that his empire is got big problems. So he calls the Council of Nicaea, and they got the bishops together from all over the Roman Empire, and they took out a whole bunch of stuff that they called the missing years, and they added stuff to the Bible. So, one of the things that they added to the Bible had to do with Jesus' father, his biological father. Because at the time, There were 5 religions in the world that all had a virgin birth. There's no virgin birth in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke at all, the original 3 Gospels. Mithraism, Buddhism, and there are 5 religions, ancient religions. And Horus, you know, the Egyptian god Horus, his mother was Isis, the Egyptian goddess, right? That was a virgin birth also. But Christianity didn't have a virgin birth. So when they rewrote the Bible in 381, they took out all the information about his family because people were asking, if he's the only son of God, how does he have 4 brothers? His 4 brothers are listed in the Bible. St. James is his first brother, then, the closest in age to him. People were asking, how does this make sense? So they removed all of their family stuff so it would align with this whole thing of the virgin birth and the story that Christianity adopted from those 5 religions that had been around for 1,000 to 2,000 years. So what we were left with in the Bible is that on that terrible day, 2,000 years ago, 3 men were tortured on that day. Is this something? Okay. See if I can do this, guys. Okay. I'd like to thank my tech crew here for. So, 3 men are tortured like this, but one of those men is taken down from the cross after 6 hours and put into the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. But they've taken out Yeshua, which is Jesus' real name. He wasn't called Jesus until 300 years later. His name that he was born with is Yeshua. Jesus is not a Jewish name. The way we got to the name Jesus is originally it was Yeshua, and then when it was changed into the Greek Bible, that was called Iassos. And then over time, they kept changing the names because different languages, from Spanish to Latin to Italian, all these different languages, they pronounce letters different. Like a Spanish person would pronounce the letter J like ya, instead of like a J like we know it. And so that's how it kept getting translated, and that's how it ended up with the name Jesus. Nobody ever called him Jesus when he was alive. So they've taken out Joseph of Arimathea's relationship with Jesus, and the only thing they've told us about Joseph of Arimathea is that he is a wealthy merchant. That was in the days before you had Amazon. In case you wondered. So he's a wealthy merchant, and merchants had ships. Now, what were the ships made of back in that time? Right. Okay. Wooden ships. That's all we know about him. The last person seen at the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea is Mary Magdalene. But they've taken out Mary Magdalene's relationship to Joseph of Arimathea, and they've taken out Mary Magdalene's relationship to Yeshua. How can you figure anything out from that? So, Mother Mary's first son, we all know, is Jesus. And her second son is James, that we know as St. James in the Bible. Do you know why the missing years of Jesus' life start when he's 12? Because every Jewish boy when he's 12 starts studying for his bar mitzvah. In the early Bibles, This stuff was part of Christianity. But the church didn't want people to be celebrating a bar mitzvah because they wanted to emulate Jesus, because they were creating a new religion. So they simply made the missing years of his life start when he was 12, so that they wouldn't have to explain his Jewish heritage that he got bar mitzvah. That's it. So we all know that Jesus comes back when he's 30 years old, right? And we know he lives from 30 till 33 when this terrible thing happens. Mother Mary had a sister. And this sister became the wife of Joseph of Arimathea. They had two daughters, Mary Magdalene and her sister Martha, who's also in the Bible. What happens is that Mother Mary's sister, Mary Magdalene and Martha's mom, she dies young. So what did people do back in the day when your nieces would not have a mom? So Mother Mary adopts Mary Magdalene and Martha, and her two nieces are now her two stepdaughters. Can you see why they took this out of the Bible? So, during the missing years of his life, when Jesus and his first brother James, who's 3 years younger, are traveling the world, we're told in the Bible that they were carpenters, that Jesus was a carpenter, right? Now, what are the two most popular things that you have in the desert? Well, a little bit different. Sand. They got lots of sand and they have lots of rocks. And can you tell me one thing that they don't have a lot of in the desert? Wood. So if he's a carpenter, living in a place where they don't have wood. Thanks. Now there's two reasons why. There's two reasons why they made him a carpenter in the Bible. One is because Jesus and James worked for their uncle, Joseph of Arimathea, because their mother, her sister, marries Joseph of Arimathea, who's the wealthy businessman. And so they worked for their uncle as carpenters on his wooden ships. You can't be a carpenter if you don't have wood. And there's another reason why, when they rewrote the Bible, why they called him a carpenter. It was because carpenters had better reputations than sailors. That's right. That's worth a giggle. Because sailors, we all know the stories about sailors. So if you're trying to get people to follow somebody who's going to be respectful, saying that they're a sailor would not be a respectable job, as much as a carpenter. So, what happens when Jesus is 30 and when James is 27, and when Mary Magdalene is 16, and when Martha is 18, Mother Mary introduces the two brothers to their two cousins who are now their stepsisters. Jesus and Mary Magdalene had love at first sight. James and Martha have love at first sight. Can you see why this was removed? And in the time from where Jesus is 30 to 33, he and Mary Magdalene have 3 kids. That's pretty easy math. So the reason why only one of these three men who was tortured is taken down off the cross after 6 hours and put in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea is because Joseph of Arimathea is Jesus' father-in-law, because he's married to his daughter, Mary Magdalene. Joseph of Arimathea pays a Roman soldier to take him down from the cross after 6 hours and put him in his tomb. People didn't have tombs. Only the wealthy, wealthy people had a tomb. Most people didn't have a pot to piss in. People lived in caves and they lived in tents. That Roman soldier lets Mary Magdalene and her sister Martha into the tomb each day to change the bandages on his hands and on his feet and on his rib. And on the third day, that Roman soldier brought a wooden cart with ancient wheels. Jesus is in the tomb. He's unconscious because he's having a near-death experience, because he was tortured for 6 hours. The reason why he was taken down after 6 hours is because it was the eve of Passover, the Jewish holiday of Passover. And Jewish people celebrate a holiday starting at sundown the night before. Most people who were tortured like this were tortured for 3 days, and nobody lived through that. But because Joseph of Arimathea paid the Roman soldier to take him down from the cross, he was alive. Mary Magdalene, who was a healer, a shaman, she and her sister kept him alive. And on the third day, this Roman soldier brought a wooden cart that was covered by hay. He slides the hay off to one side of the cart and puts Jesus' body in the center of the cart, covers up his body with hay. Mary Magdalene rode the horse, and that is how she saved his life. They had 3 children, and Mary Magdalene had to make the hardest decision in the world. Her kids were 1, 2, and 3 years old. She gave the guardianship of her children over to Mother Mary, who brought up her 3 kids, and those 3 kids thought that Mother Mary was their mom their whole life. Mary Magdalene saves him. Here, you can pass this around. And so, in most of the movies I've seen, when somebody saves the good guy, that's the hero. Mary Magdalene is the hero of this story because she kept him alive, and because Joseph of Arimathea had business contacts all over the world, and especially all over Israel. They were able to go to different families that Mary Magdalene grew up visiting, where they could hide him and eventually make their way all the way up to France, which took about 5 years. Now, does anybody know anything about the cave of Mary Magdalene or the Basilica of Mary Magdalene? Is that, okay, so you've been there?
Yep.
Okay. So, in the year 1279, a French nobleman is visited in a dream by Mary Magdalene. And Mary Magdalene tells this French nobleman that her bones are buried in a box under a church in the south of France. This is such a powerful experience to this French nobleman that he gets a crew of men, goes down to the town of Saint Maximin. They find a little church in Saint Maximin. Under the church, they find a wooden box. They open up this wooden box, and there are human bones in this box with a handwritten letter that states, "Here lie the bones of Saint Mary Magdalene," because she was a healer. They built the Basilica of Saint Mary Magdalene, started it in 1279, and there is an historical record that they changed the name of the town in 1279 to Saint Maximin le Saint Bound, which means the saint from the cave. I've been to that church. I have to tell you, there's something different about that church. There really is. Would anybody like to ask me a question?
What's different?
What's different about that church? Sometimes you can go into a church and it feels a little heavy, like heavy old energy, but that church didn't have that. And the Cave of Mary Magdalene is about 45 minutes away from where they built the church. Did you go to the Cave of Mary Magdalene? You did. So it took me about 45 minutes to walk up this mountain because it is steep. I mean, I couldn't imagine trying to carry food or water or supplies up this. It was hard enough to climb up this thing just walking up by yourself. I had to stop 5 times, right? And one of the unique things about the cave, it's at the top of the mountain. And in the year before I went there, for no reason, I was painting mountains and caves. I finished my book, and when my book was finished, I realized that all my paintings were telling their story. I didn't paint. I think this would be a great time for us to do a meditation. Because until you have your own experience, you're believing somebody else's story. There's nothing in between you having an experience with Jesus, Mary Magdalene, Mother Mary, or any of the ascended masters. It takes an open mind, and if any of you think that you're not worthy, I have to tell you that you are. So you guys can close your eyes. Get comfortable. Take a couple of long, deep inhales. And relax. I'm going to start this journey off on a beach. And it's a beautiful day. So take a long inhale through your nose, smelling the ocean air in your nostrils. From this point forward, with each breath you take, be aware of the smell of the ocean air in your nostrils. Now it's a perfect day. Beautiful breeze just blew right by. And open your heart. And open your mind. Now reach down with your right hand and pick up some sand and straighten your back. And now rub your hands together and watch that sand float down by your feet. Take another long, deep inhale, smelling the ocean air in your nostrils. Allow your eyes to scan over the water, and off in the distance is an old white ship with large white sails, and it's heading in our direction. So take a couple of steps forward, and with your right foot, write your name in the sand. take 3 steps forward, 3 steps to the left, and in all capital letters, write the word love in the sand. And think about somebody who you love. Take a long inhale through your nose, smelling the ocean air in your nostrils. It's a beautiful breeze of the ocean. Feel the wind blow through your hair. Feel the wind blow through your clothing. As you look off into the distance, you can see that that ship is getting much closer. So start walking down towards the water and feel how the sand increases in moisture as you get closer to where the waves are ending. Stop about 1 foot before the water, and now dip your right big toe into the water. And now drop your right foot into the water so you can feel that cool sensation around the back of your ankle and on the top of your foot. Put your left foot in the water. And now if you look over to your right, the boat is there at the right. And start walking out towards the boat and feel the water rise up to your ankles and up to your knees and up to your hips. And if you like, you can walk on top of the water. You can walk across the water, no problem. And as you get closer to the boat, 2 old ropes are lowered down with wooden steps in between them. When you get to the boat, put your feet on the bottom step, hold on to the 2 ropes with your hand, and just hang here for a little bit. The ladder is being moved gently by the waves and the water. Take a long, deep inhale through your nose, smelling the ocean air in your nostrils. Start climbing the ladder, and when you get to the top, someone is waiting for you.
Spirit's gonna tell me what I need to know. Spirit's gonna tell me what I need to know. I feel it in my heart, I feel it in my soul. Spirit's gonna tell me what I need to know. I feel it in my heart, I feel it in my soul. Spirit's gonna tell me what I need to know. I feel it in my heart, I feel it in my soul. Spirit's gonna tell me what I need to know. Spirit's gonna tell me what I need to know. Spirit's gonna tell me what I need to know. I feel it in my heart, I feel it in my soul. Spirit's gonna tell me what I need to know. I feel it in my heart, I feel it in my soul. Spirit's gonna tell me what I need to know. I feel it in my heart, I feel it in my soul. Spirit's gonna show me what I need to know. Now you think you guys can sing with me? Spirit's gonna show me what I need to know. Spirit's gonna show me what I need to know. I feel it in my heart, I feel it in my soul. Spirit's gonna show me what I need to know. I feel it in my heart, I feel it in my soul. Spirit's gonna tell me what I need to know. I feel it in my heart, I feel it in my soul. Spirit's gonna tell me what I need to know. Spirit's gonna tell me what I need to know. Spirit's gonna tell me what I need to know. I feel it in my heart, I feel it in my soul. Spirit's gonna tell me what I need to know. Because you were listening to the Beatles before you came today? We were talking about the space between us all and the people who hide themselves behind a wall of illusion. Never glimpse the truth, and it's far too late when they pass away. Try to realize it's all within yourself. No one else can make you change. And the time will come when you'll see we're all one and life goes on within you and without Try to realize it's all within yourself. No one else can make you change. And the time will come when you'll see we're all one. Life goes on within you and without you.
This next song I'm going to play for you guys is something that I wrote before Channeling Harrison came out, and when I found out that John Lennon was part of this whole thing. So you got to understand, I was such a skeptic about this stuff. I spent 3 years convincing myself this stuff wasn't real, but it got to a certain point where it got really real, really. And I can tell you about how that happened if you'd like to know, but what I'm going to play right now is a song that I wrote with John because I wasn't good at channeling information. Like, you know how some channelers can tell you all this stuff? You know? That's not the way it worked with me. But the way it did work with me was that I started to write music that was about things that I never wrote about. And I was going to play a different song, but when I came back from Hawaii, I went to visit my mom. And my mom has always been such a great supporter of everything that I was doing, right? And when I played this next song for my mom, when I was done playing this song for my mom said, "That definitely isn't you, because that's way better than any of the songs you ever wrote." I swear. You know.
If I could change the world, what I'd like to do is find a way to make everyone shine like you, make everyone laugh like you, and shine like you. There's so many things I would change in this world, but I wouldn't change anything about you. I wouldn't change anything about you. If I could change the world, I'd make this a brighter place, with sunshine and happiness on every face. I'd make us all good people, sharing the space, and I'd remove the race from the human race, but I wouldn't change anything about you. I wouldn't change anything about you. I wouldn't change anything about you.
So you have to understand that I had become friends in a crazy way 10 years before all this stuff happened with May Pang. May Pang was John Lennon and Yoko Ono's personal assistant. And when John and Yoko split up, Yoko made sure that John and their assistant became a couple, because honestly it was a way of kind of Yoko keeping track on what John was doing. And John, the whole 18 months that they were separated, was trying to get back together with Yoko, but she wouldn't take him back. And so May Pang, who was their assistant, became John's girlfriend. And I was doing a trade show in New York at the Javits Center, the big convention center, right? And back in the days of CDs, I had my meditation CDs that the spiritual people wanted to meditate or use it for massage therapy would use it. But I had like 12 CDs of the best songs from the 60s and the 70s, right? And the idea of playing those songs at a trade show is that people would recognize the songs and then want to buy it. So I'm at the Javits Center in New York City with like 2,000 other booths. And I'm in the middle of the show, so it takes 3 hours for people to get to where I am, okay? And the show opened at 9 o'clock, it's 9:30 in the morning, and I get this feeling. I didn't call it channeling it. I just thought it was a thought or a feeling. I got this feeling that I should play John Lennon's song, Number 9 Dream. That was a song that most people didn't know. And it's 9:30, there's nobody there. Why am I gonna play a song that nobody knows, that I haven't played in 5 years? Because nobody ever recognizes it. You know, if I played Imagine, everybody would recognize that, right? And so I'm like, I'm not gonna play that song, that's ridiculous, it doesn't make any sense. Silence. Real, like, because I was getting this feeling, I got an inner silence that was telling me, you're gonna miss the boat if you don't follow this intuitive hunch that you're having. So I put it on my sound system against my better judgment, right? Because there was no reason for me to play a song I hadn't played in 5 years. So, a minute later, I'm at a booth on the corner, and these two women come around from the other side, from the other row of booths, and they're walking by my booth, and there's a white woman and an Asian woman. And the white woman says, she sang on this song. And I said, are you a professional singer? And she said, no, not really. I said, well, you gotta be a professional singer if you sang on a John Lennon song. How did that happen? And so her friend said, this is May Pang.
Oh.
That's why John was giving me the nudge to play that song, because he knew that May Pang sang on that song. And that would start the conversation between those two people and me. So I said, wow, I have heard of you. You know, because if you were a musician, you would know who May Pang is from music history, you know. And I said, you know, I'd love to go out for dinner or meet somewhere, have coffee or something, so I could find out what it was like for you to live with John Lennon. Really, that was 10 years before any of this stuff happened. Okay, so we went out to a sushi restaurant a couple of nights later, and she told me stories about John Lennon for 3.5 hours. And she kept saying, I don't know why I'm telling you this. You know what I mean? Because she was wondering herself, you know. And so that's how I became friends with May Pang. And this next story is about, so I was known for playing this flute music, right? And back in the day, I couldn't give away my vocal music. Now people are appreciating my vocal music, you know? But back then, everybody just wanted to hear me play the flute and Don't make me listen to you sing, really. And so I had just recorded a song, vocal song, that I wrote about my career. And I had a copy of it. And so after we had this great 3.5 hour dinner, she says, you know, I'd like to hear one of your vocal songs. And so we went into my car, and it had a CD player, and I had a recording of this song called Jet Plane that I had just written. And after I played her the song, she said, can I hear that again? Okay, so I played it again, and then she said, you know, I was the publisher who took care of the Beatles catalog, and I think this is a really, really fantastic song. Can I have this demo CD, you know? I'm like, well, absolutely, you can have it, right? So she says, you know, I have lots of connections in the music business, and is it okay if I play this for people in the music business? I'm like, thank you, God. You know, I've been waiting 30 years for somebody to say this to me, right? And so she takes it, and about a month later, she calls me back, and she says, you know, all the record companies and all the guys at the record companies are looking for rap and hip hop, because rap and hip hop was popular then, so that shows you what time frame it was. And she says, all of the record companies that I played the song to passed on it, because they're all looking for the next big rap artist or the next big hip hop artist. But she said, I want to tell you a story because I don't want you to feel bad that all the record companies passed on this song and on your music. And she said, John Lennon was very good, close friends with Mick Jagger. And they used to talk about how people all over the world went crazy over the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and that there were so many other groups that were really good that never got anywhere. So John Lennon and Mick Jagger decided they said to May Pang, we made an album with John and Mick Jagger singing, and with the best band in the world. The guys who played on all the hit songs, right? The greatest drummer, bass player, guitar player, keyboard player. And John said to me, we want you to try to get us a record deal with this music we just made, but there's one condition. And that condition is you can't tell anybody that it's John Lennon, Mick Jagger with the greatest band in the world. We want to see if anybody in the music business actually has the ears to hear any difference between us and everybody else, as long as the Beatles and the Stones names are not attached to it. So May Pang brought that tape to every record company in New York. She sent it to every record company in New York from her. Now, in those days, if a record company passed on your music, it just got tossed in a garbage can. You know, nobody ever sent a tape back, you know? And she said, one of the presidents of one of the biggest record companies in the world happened to send the tape back to me. And he put a little note in with the cassette tape. And it said, Dear May, forget this band. The singer can't sing and the band can't play. For real. So the reason why she told me that was so this way I wouldn't feel bad that these record companies had passed on me. And she said, these guys don't know anything. They don't know anything. It's like, you know, when you go to the racetrack and you pick a number and you pick a horse, that's the way they pick bands. And anyway, so this, what's that? Oh, isn't it great that I did knock that over? I think that's great. So once I found out John, so May Pang told me some things about John when he was in a very bad part of his life that were not positive. And I didn't really know any famous people in the music business. And sometimes to try to puff myself up a little bit, I would tell my friends these disparaging stories that May Pang told me about John. And so once in a blue moon, I would share with my musician friends some of these things that were not nice about him. And so what happened was, before my book came out, I kept asking the same questions, and people kept asking me the same questions. Why did George pick you, and what is this all about? I mean, I couldn't tell you how many times I had people ask me that, because that's the most obvious question, right? So I was in Hawaii, and I had met somebody who was a channeler. And we went into meditation in Hawaii by the ocean. And I want to know why I'm involved in this. You know, at that point, my book was going to be coming out in 6 months. No musician had ever put out a book about his experiences with another dead musician. Okay? And I had a spotless reputation. I mean, really, I couldn't have had a more spotless reputation. And I was really concerned what people were going to think about me putting out this book saying that George Harrison is appearing to me. You know what I mean? And these are all the things that have happened. So we went into meditation, and this channeler was channeling, and everything she was channeling, I was seeing or feeling in my inner vision. And this unbelievable presence came in front of me. It was like as big as a mountain. I felt like this big. I felt like a chipmunk in front of this ginormous presence of white light, and it was like 30 or 40 feet tall. And I was really impressed, because I thought, oh my God, this is George Harrison's energy? Holy mackerel, I can't call him God, but he's bigger than a saint. I mean, it was just so bigger than anything I'd ever experienced. And she said, George wants to tell you, just relax. The hard part is over. We've taken care of everything. And I'm getting this intuitively, and she's confirming it, you know, so like, wow, this is like this is a breakthrough moment for me. And so inwardly, I say to George, you know, can you have one of your friends, your famous friends, support me in this thing? So this way I'm not out here on a limb talking about this thing. If like, can you get your buddy Eric Clapton, can he support me in this thing so I look more credible? Just relax, the hard part is over. We've taken care of everything. Well, how about your son? Your son Danny plays guitar. Maybe we can make music together like Simon and Garfunkel. Just relax. The hard part is over. We've taken care of everything. Now, after he had said this to me 9 times, I started thinking, what do you mean we've taken care of everything? Who is this we? I'm finally getting comfortable with the idea that, George, you're interested in me and you're around me for some reason. But what do you mean we've taken care of everything? And this voice on the left appears to me, and this voice says, don't worry about the people who aren't going to believe you, because there will be plenty of people who will believe you. And at that moment, I thought, I am sliding down that crazy hill I hear that people go when they hear lots of voices in their head. I didn't know anybody who heard voices in their heads. And I thought I was losing it, because this was John Lennon's voice. Now, I don't ordinarily share this story, but the first thing that came to my mind is, oh my God, I've been talking all these crappy things about John Lennon. Oh, I can't even believe it. So the only thing I could think of to say was, John, are you really involved in this? And he said, yes, I am, but I'm not making any long-term commitments. I didn't really know what to think about that. You know, I didn't know what that meant. And they told me and told the channeler that my music was more important in this world than I had a clue of. Because there were 1 million people who bought my CDs, who were meditating to my music every day, going to sleep to my music. There were 25,000 massage therapists in the United States and Canada that were using my music all day long. People went for a massage and they closed their eyes, get a massage, and then they'd be hearing my music and they'd be having inner experiences. So all of this happens, it lasts about 45 minutes, this channeling. And my life was never the same after that, because after that there were certain numbers that were appearing around me everywhere I went. And they were barraging me with all of this stuff. And so when I got back to New York from Hawaii, I literally had to keep a notebook with one sentence of every miraculous thing that happened in my life. Because if 2 miraculous things happened every day, which was no big deal for them, after a week, that's 14 miracles. You can't remember more than 10 miracles in a shot. You know what I mean? That may sound funny, but like, how much of that stuff can you remember? So I would keep a notebook of one sentence so I wouldn't lose and forget it. And I started writing these into stories that got added to the end of my book that I had already got a publishing deal for. My publishing deal for the book was this big, and then by the time it got published, because I added all these stories that they were creating in my life at that point, at the end of that cycle, they all became part of the book. And I would be writing these things for 4 or 5 hours a day. Can you imagine having to write that much stuff? I had other things I had to do in my life. And so I started sending my publisher all these stories, and he started adding them to the back of the book. And there was too much energy, and his computer crashed. And so I was living in New York, and my publisher lived in Charlottesville, Virginia. Are you familiar with the Monroe Institute? Well, he lived on the same mountain as the Monroe Institute. And so I had to drive 6 hours down to Charlottesville to meet with my publisher to make sure that all these new stories hadn't gotten lost. So I get to my publisher's, he lived on a little dirt road on the top of a mountain, maybe 10 houses in the whole road. And we read through the whole manuscript. And we get to the end of the manuscript, and my publisher says, well, anybody who's going to buy this book is going to want to know, have 2 questions answered. Why did George pick you, and what is this all about? I said, I have no idea. And he said, well, I published books by over 200 famous channelers. What do you think about me calling one of these channelers and seeing if they can connect with George, and we can find out where you're involved in this? And I said, well, I'm not really comfortable with that. And he said, why not? I said, because I don't believe in channeling. He said, but your book is called Channeling Harrison. I said, no, I'm sorry. I mean, you're going to call somebody up and I'm going to believe that they're going to, this is long before Bob Murray started calling me, okay? That sounded like baloney would be the nice way to say it, you know? I said, no, I'm not comfortable with this, and I'm telling you, every word in this book is true. I have not exaggerated one thing. I have not made one thing up. I'm not going to just make something up. He says, well, if you're not going to tell me what this is all about, he says, I'm going to write into the book what I think this is about, because I'm not publishing your book if we don't tell people what this is about. I said, okay, you do what you want, but I'm telling you right now, every word in this book is true. So my publisher was sitting next to me, and I'm sitting over here, and he's typing into my manuscript in his computer, and he's speaking, and he says, what George wants is... And before he can finish the sentence, George turns off the power in his house. The lights go off, his computer shuts down. His jaw drops down like this, and I can't stop laughing for 10 minutes because of the look on his face. Because that never happened. And when he's finally able to speak, because he was really just knocked out by this whole thing, he said, well, I guess George doesn't want me writing in your book what I think this is about. I said, yeah, I think you're right. So his wife could not believe that I had never heard George's most famous album, All Things Must Pass. That was the, remind me, after I tell this, remind me to tell you about how George connected with Jesus, okay? Because I may forget while I'm telling this story, right? So my publisher's wife burns a copy of All Things Must Pass, George's album, and I get into my car, put that on my knee, and I'm going to drive into town to do some grocery shopping because I was going to be leaving the next day. I'm driving down this dirt road and I see this older guy who was probably in his 70s with long gray hair. He's walking down this dirt road, and I pass him in my car, and I get to the stop sign, and man, he must have been like 100 yards behind me, or 50 yards. He was way behind me. I get to the stop sign, and I hear this voice that tells me, wait at the stop sign for the guy with the long gray hair. I'm like, really? Really? Do I really have to do this? Okay, I'll wait. I wait at that stop sign for 12 minutes for this guy to walk all the way down this road and get to my car. I open my window. What am I going to say to this guy? So I said, you look like a musician because you have long hair. Are you a musician? He said, no, I'm not a musician. I'm a sound engineer. Okay, do you do live sound or do you do studio sound? He said, well, I've done both, but I've done more studio sound. So I get the nudge, ask him if he's ever worked with anybody famous. Have you worked with anybody famous? He said, well, I used to work with Alan White. I said, man, that name sounds familiar. How come that sounds familiar? He says, because Alan White is the drummer who played on George Harrison's album, All Things Must Pass. It's sitting on my lap. I just got given that thing 15 minutes before. And he said he also played on John Lennon's song, Imagine. So I went into town to do my shopping. I came back and my publisher wanted me to take me to a restaurant that had music that was in the middle of nowhere. And some of his friends that were beginning musicians or intermediate musicians were playing at this restaurant. And he wanted me to bring my guitar and show these guys how this is done. Because I was a professional. He wanted me to show off for these guys, right? So I start playing with these guys who have mandolins and banjos and acoustic guitars. And my G string on my guitar will not stay in tune. And for an hour and a half, every 2 minutes, I'm retuning my G string on my guitar. I wonder whose name starts with G. Okay? So at the same time, I'm having a hard time tuning my guitar. The guy with the long hair, a neighbor of my publisher, is having wine and cheese thing at another neighbor on their street, on their dirt road. And the woman who was hosting this little soiree was a spiritual writer. And the long gray-haired guy says, you know, did you guys know that our neighbor Bob Friedman is publishing this guy's book, David Young, and it's a book about his experiences with George Harrison. It's called Channeling Harrison. Well, Lori, who's hosting this little soiree, thinks this is weird because she's a writer and editor of spiritual books. And a couple of months earlier, some guy she never met, never heard of, a famous channeler from Canada named Bob Murray, started sending her his monthly channelings for his newsletter. And so she's getting sent these channelings from Bob Murray, and he's channeling John Lennon and George Harrison. And that's too many George Harrisons for that little street in the middle of nowhere. So Lori calls up Bob Murray in Canada. Do you know where Bob lived in Canada? It was a little village 3 hours from Quebec called Georgeville. Really? So she calls up Bob Murray and says, Bob, did you know that there's a guy named David Young who has a book coming out about his experiences with George Harrison? Bob said, Lori, get on your computer right now because George and John are giving me a message to give to David Young right now. So I want you to write it down in your computer. So she texted me, we played phone tag for a couple of days. And a couple of days later, as I'm leaving Charlottesville, on my way to Cincinnati to a medical convention, because I sold music to doctors who used my music to keep people relaxed, right? As I'm leaving, and I'm on this winding road, Lori calls me up and she says, okay, I can read you this message from Bob Murray from George and John. And this was the message. Hi, David. This is George and John. We want to tell you you're a wonderful musician. You're doing a great job keeping track of all the stories for the book. But there's something wrong with the G string on your guitar because you left it in a place with a humidity problem. I left my guitar at my mom's house and she had a humidity problem because the heat kept going on and it wouldn't turn off. Nobody in this world knew I was having a hard time tuning my guitar. And they answered a whole bunch of things that my friends were asking me about. Now, in the middle of this, my mom calls me, but I didn't take my mom's call because I was busy having my mind blown. And so a half hour later, my mom calls back and she says, David, you're not going to believe what just happened. I said, no, Mom, you're not going to believe what just happened. You know? So I tell her what just happened. And then she says, well, when all that was happening with you, Paul McCartney was on television doing a press conference. And he hadn't been interviewed in years. And when a celebrity does a press conference, they give the host questions because they want to answer a certain question because they want to talk about a specific topic. And so the planted question Paul McCartney gave to the host is, are you writing or collaborating with anyone nowadays? And on international television in a press conference, Paul McCartney said, I'm still writing and collaborating with John, and once in a while I get together with George. Unbelievable, right? So I get to Cincinnati 6 hours later, and if I said that my mind was spinning, it was more than spinning. I used to live in reality, and what has happened to my reality? I'm not living in the same reality that I was living. How is this stuff even possible? So I get to Cincinnati. Could you do me a favor? There's one of the plaques that has the mermaid on it. Could you bring that over to me? I get to Cincinnati, and I'm unloading my SUV, and I hear this voice. Take in the mermaid painting. Oh, gosh. Thanks. I had the original version of the mermaid painting was about this big. And I had not taken the mermaid painting out of my car for at least 6 months because nobody ever bought it. What's the point? We bringing this out to have nobody buy it on a week and then just put it back in my RV. Not my RV, in my SUV. So this thing was stashed under a bunch of stuff because other stuff got loaded on top of that in that 6 months. Oh man, I don't want to go get that mermaid painting. Then the voice got louder. Bring in the mermaid painting. Okay. All right, I'll bring in the mermaid painting. I hang the mermaid painting up in my booth. It's a 3-day show, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And on Sunday afternoon, this woman comes up to my booth and with a really serious face says, why did you paint this mermaid? I said, well, I had a friend who lived in the Keys, and his girlfriend used to wear this purple bikini, and they always used to call her the Purple Mermaid. And this guy called me up once a week for 2 months, asking me to make a mermaid painting that he can give to his girlfriend. And I didn't want to paint a mermaid, because what man do you know wants to make a painting of a mermaid? That's not what I was thinking about in painting. So this guy, after calling me for 2 months every week, I said, okay, I'll make the painting to get you off my back. So I make the painting, and I call the guy up, and his number's disconnected, and I never hear from the guy again. So, ma'am, why is this painting so important to you? She said, I have been a professional channeler for 40 years. I've trained over 100 people who are now professional channelers. This is 2013. She was ahead of the curve, like you were ahead of the curve. And she said, when my daughter was a little girl, she always used to say that she had this guardian angel who was a mermaid. She talked about her all the time. So I decided to do a reading for my daughter, and this mermaid popped up, and how did you paint her so perfectly? I was a beginning painter. I said, well, I didn't really think it was even that good. She bought 3 CDs and a little copy of The Mermaid, because they used to sell like these 6-inch by 6-inch square images that people could hang up on the wall. Like they'd be attached to foam core, so it had a little backing to it, right? And she's walking away afterwards, and I'm like, man, after what I've just experienced in the last 2 weeks with George and hearing John Lennon's voice and all this stuff, I think I'm actually ready to pay somebody to do channeling. You have no idea what a step that was for me. You know what I mean? Because you couldn't talk to me about channeling back then. I mean, if 1-800-PSYCHIC came up on TV, I'd click the channel and laugh. So I went after her and I said, ma'am, I've been having experiences with one guy for 3 years, and I have a book coming out in 6 months next year, and man, I am so concerned about what people are going to think about me, and I don't know why I am involved in this thing. I mean, I never cared about this guy when he was alive. And I said, can I have a reading from you? And she said, I'll come back to your booth at 4 o'clock when the show ends. So everybody had left. I sit down in a chair across from her, and I said, the guy who I'm having experiences with is George Harrison. So she closes her eyes. She gets silent for about a minute, and she says, George wants to tell you, just relax. The hard part is over. We've taken care of everything. Word for word. And I'm like, yeah, I know. He told me that a bunch of times 2 weeks ago in Hawaii, and there was a channeler there and confirmed the whole thing. And she said, George wants you to know that your souls have been so connected throughout history. I can't even count how many lifetimes that you've had together. And the love he has for you is beyond anything that I've ever experienced after 40 years of channeling. And then she said, wait a minute. There's somebody else who wants to be involved in this conversation. Did you know that John Lennon was involved in this? I'm like, well, I don't know how involved he is in this. 2 weeks ago when I thought I had a channeling experience in Hawaii, I thought he appeared and said something to me, but I mean, I don't know if it was just my imagination or what. And she said, well, John wants to tell you, don't worry about the people who aren't going to believe you, because there will be plenty of people who will believe you. Exactly what he said to me in Hawaii 2 weeks earlier. And these guys they're channeling through it, telling, man, David has no idea how many people are using his music for a spiritual purpose. And he's just clueless that his music is important in the world. Because I was just trying to make a living. You know what I mean? When you're trying to make a living, you're trying to make a living. You know, I wasn't thinking about all the people who are actually using my music. So this goes on for 45 minutes. And she called me up 3 days later. She wouldn't take money from me. That's rare for a channeler, because those people need to make a living too, you know. And she called me up 3 days later, and she said it took 3 days for her body to stop vibrating from the intense energy that she experienced while she was channeling George and John. And she said she never felt anything like that in her whole life. And so that was when I wrote this song. And this was a song that John gave me, because that first song, you know, that was a George song. Most of the time, when they wrote songs